Next up is our first student speaker of the evening. She's majoring in psychology and minoring in statistics. For the last 3 years, she's been researching and exploring identity and development. Today, she's going to share with us her results. Please welcome Stephanie Washburn.
Hello, everyone. Back in the year of 2020, I embarked on my journey as an undergraduate student here at the University of Central Florida. I was fortunate enough to be one of 35 students selected in a program, which students were paired with faculty and trained in the rigorous methods of research. I was paired with Dr. Stephen Berman, an associate professor of psychology who spent the majority of his career studying identity. Now, going into the research lab, I felt a bit apprehensive. You see, I didn't know a lot about identity and had not heard about it outside the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, and certain conversations about social justice and awareness. Yet, as I delved into my research, I realized that our identities are multifaceted. You see, they're composed of a myriad of factors that include our social upbringing, culture, experiences, and beliefs. Our identities are the building blocks of who we are, and they serve as a lens through which we perceive and interact with the world around us. Now, unless you were an interviewee for Google and they're trying to throw you off one of their more creative questions, or you were on a self-discovery retreat of some sort, I'm sure on a daily basis you do not get asked, who are you? And what makes up the components of your identity? If I were to answer that question, I would say the following. To start with, I am a student. That is a central component of my identity, because for the past 3.5 years, I've allocated most of my time and energy towards that goal. The second thing I would say is that I am Peruvian. Now, being born Peruvian didn't automatically make it an aspect of my identity, except most of the food, music, and culture that I engage in is all because I am Peruvian, and therefore, it is central to my identity. Now, I'm going to ask you as an audience, right now, to think about not one, but two things that are central to your identities. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that silently. All right, hopefully at this point, you thought about one or two things that came to mind. Now, these two things that came to mind are probably the most central to your identity, and that's why you thought about them first. But what if I told you that there are components of your identity that you are not aware of? And what if I told you that these components could mean the difference between staying motivated or becoming unmotivated? The difference between being a proficient employee or being a poor worker? And lastly, that these components can shape the way in which you experience life. Now, there are 3 studies today I'm going to talk about that I think you are going to find to be really fascinating, because they highlight the point that our identities can shape our lives. The first one was conducted in 2008 by Dr. Lutkin Sanzik, and she looked at over 200 cases of bullying in the workplace. Now, with identity in the workplace, you might think, well, if someone receives great evaluations, if someone goes above and beyond for their work and they consistently meet deadlines, they might think to themselves, well, I'm a great worker. That's who I am. We might believe the opposite is true as well. If someone is lazy, they put in half the effort, they don't really enjoy their jobs, they may think to themselves, well, I'm a terrible employee, and that's just who I am. But what was really fascinating about this study was that in cases of bullying, people who previously had identities of being a great worker, once bullied, adopted the opposite identity. What they found in these specific cases was that once an employee adopted the identity of being a core worker, in the months that followed, the quality of their work significantly decreased. The second study was conducted by Dr. Morris Brownwin, and he looked at 27 cases of breast cancer survivors, or people who have recovered from breast cancer. Now, typically, one of two identities were formed. The first one is the identity of being a survivor, and the second one is the identity of being a victim. And they found that in the cases where people adopted the identity of being a survivor, those people significantly had higher levels of psychological well-being and perceived self-strength. Now, for the last study, it was actually conducted by Dr. Stephen Berger and I in 2023. We looked at a sample of over 500 students here at the University of Central Florida. And what we found was that levels of identity distress or fear and apprehension surrounding our own identities are significantly correlated with diminishes in executive functions. Now, what are executive functions? They are the functions that are essential to our everyday survival. They include our working memory, perception, attention, and cognition, or the ability to think. So what our findings found was that our identities have the ability to impact our everyday functions. So with this in mind, how do we use this? How do we use this to benefit our own lives? Well, today, we can use it in regards to motivation. In motivational psychology, we found that the greatest motivators are actually our own identities. You see, in the past, we have thought about emotion and motivation in this way. To start off with, we have an outcome in mind. Say that your outcome is to lose 5 pounds. So, on the outermost layer, you have that outcome, and then you begin to think to yourself, well, what do I have to do to accomplish this outcome? Do I have to go on a diet, go to the gym once or twice a week? These are your processes. And finally, over time, say, perhaps you accomplish your outcome and you engage in these processes to get there, and perhaps your identity will change at the end of all of that. But what motivational psychologists have found today is that the order in which we think of these things should actually be reversed. Because our greatest form of intrinsic or inner motivation is derived from our identities. You see, behavior that is not aligned with our sense of self will not last. Take this instance, for example. 2 people are offered an enormous slice of chocolate cake. Now, this isn't a regular slice of chocolate cake. It's about this high, this wide. And these 2 people had been previously living unhealthy lifestyles. Now, the first one, when offered the cake, says, no thank you, I'm trying to quit. I'm attempting to live a healthier lifestyle. Now, this is a reasonable response, but as you can see, they still identify as someone who lives with the prior behaviors. And the second person, when asked, says, no thank you, I am a healthy eater, and therefore I do not indulge in those behaviors. A subtle yet significant shift in their answer because they associate their identity with their own behaviors. And what motivational psychologists today are saying is that between the 2 answers, consistently over time, the second person is much more likely to resist that enormous slice of chocolate cake. Take another instance, for example. I'm sure we all know that one annoying person who always feels the need to outdo others. Perhaps in primary school, while you were learning addition and subtraction, there's that one person who felt the need to learn college-level calculus. Or perhaps there's a work party, and everyone comes in with their boxed public cupcakes. And that one person shows up with a 7-layer complex dessert. Just makes the rest of us look terrible. Well, in primary school, I was one of those annoying people. You see, each time I was told to read a chapter for an assignment, I would come in the next day, having read the entirety of the novel. Each time I was asked to, for example, make a picture of an ancient civilization, I would come in with a three-dimensional papier-mâché model. Now, we wonder with people like this, these annoying people, what is it that drives this behavior? Is it parental influence at a young age? Is it an innate sense of competitiveness? Or is it an underlying motive? Well, in my case, it was none of the above. In my case, it was the fact that each time I did well on an assignment, my teachers would say to me, they would say, "Stephanie, wow, you are so intelligent." And my parents would reinforce that as well. So as a developing child, a central aspect of my identity was being intelligent. And therefore, every time I engaged in those behaviors, I was reinforcing that identity. And that was my greatest motivator. Luckily for us, we can apply this to our own lives today. Best-selling author James Clear, of a book called Atomic Habits, which you may have heard of before, has a two-step process to cultivating identity-based behaviors. You see, the goal is not to lose those 5 pounds. The goal is to become a healthier person. And the goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. And the first step of this two-step process is choose who do you want to become. Write it down on a piece of paper. I am a runner. Or I am a healthy eater. And the second step of this process is prove it to yourself. The first time you write it down, you're not automatically going to accept that new identity. You won't believe yourself. But each time you engage in behaviors, that is like a vote for the new person that you're becoming. If you go on a run, that's a vote that you are a runner. If you decide to eat a healthier meal, that is a vote for becoming a healthier person. And you see, over time, votes add up. Our identities are like kaleidoscopes, filled with ever-changing patterns and unique colors. When we begin to embrace who we are, we can choose the outcomes in our life and how we wish to experience life as well. Thank you.